All right, thanks for attending this afternoon. So, we kicked around a lot of ideas on how to try to use this hour to talk about authentication, and really, it boiled down to so many people had so many different perspectives around what's wrong, what we could do to fix it, how to go about fixing it, that it seemed like the best opportunity for us to share that with folks would be to build a panel of people to talk about it that all come from different backgrounds and perspectives. So I know you've probably heard a lot during this conference so far, right? Breaches are up. Breaches are happening more and more because of compromised credentials. Myself, and I believe the members of this panel all feel like authentication may actually be putting organizations at greater risk rather than less risk, even though it's authentication. Imagine because you have username and password, you're actually more insecure than you are secure. So what we thought we would do is, using that as sort of an operating premise, I've got a couple of guided, vague questions for the folks on the panel today that should solicit a lot of dialogue. Given the size of the room, if you feel like you want to interject or ask a question, feel free. Just some sort of raise a hand or symbol that we should come out with a mic. We want this to be as interactive and informative and back and forth as possible. So before we begin, I'll just start and ask the panel to introduce themselves, starting with myself, Robert Block, SVP Identity Strategy at SecureAuth. I am one of the panelists who has been in the identity world most of his career. I started in the directory services world and have kind of grown up with identity. I think you'll find a varying background of folks that are up here. But that is my background. I spent a lot of time in the Big Four. I've worked for small boutiques. I've worked for resellers. I've worked for integrators, and now work for a manufacturer.
Christian Abijadi, I'm Director of Enterprise Architecture at Scripps Health. Spent my entire career pretty much in infrastructure, enterprise, whatnot. Got into the security realm of it as out of necessity. The need for us to, start developing the plans and the ways in which we are going to enforce, authentication and actually be able to identify our users properly. So it wasn't planned or scripted. It was just kind of the need for us to start introducing it from a healthcare perspective, and then grew up into the need for us to really put a lot of parameters around our users and their identity and how they behave in the environment. And that's what I'm here.
My name is Kevin Baker. I'm the information security leader for the Westfield Group, which is really Ohio Farmers Insurance, Westfield Bank, and Westfield Country Club, and Westfield Inn, and so kind of a lot of activities going there. I've been in security about 20 years. I also backed into security back in the day. Worked for Diebold for quite a few years and ended up in global services there. I've been at Westfield in about six years now, and it's been about team building and building roadmaps. And I feel that we kind of finally fought our way up to zero. And we've got some big initiatives that a lot of people at this conference are a part of, and just glad to be here. Good group.
I'm Dawn Marie Hutchinson. I'm from Optiv's Office of the CISO. My kind of identity background really is, so my security background, I backed into it also. I came from the governance, risk, and compliance side. And then when I was a CISO in a very heavily business-driven environment, that's to say, it wasn't enough to say, you need this security control and we're going to buy it. The business side would very easily just say no. And so I really didn't start to get identity smart or authentication smart until actually I was a SecureAuth customer. And that's how I kind of came into identity. And that was in 2014.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining. My name is Steve Moore, Staff Vice President, Cybersecurity Analytics for Anthem. So that umbrella includes SOC operations. It includes threat intel, incident response, our hunt program, content creation, engineering, constituent relations, that sort of bubble. And kind of what I hope to bring, to this is more of a threat perspective approach to some of the discussion and why my organization chose to adopt really adaptive authentication in general, but ultimately chose SecureAuth.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Keith Graham. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for SecureAuth. I think what you'll hear from me today is that we come at identity and access management a little bit differently. We're trying to use the tools and capabilities of IAM to solve some of the more real security problems of today, ultimately around preventing the misuse of stolen credentials. So that's what you'll be hearing from me today.
Great, thanks. So again, some folks, working in the trenches on projects and programs today, others with broader industry knowledge and perspective, others not in security whatsoever, and then, of course, Keith and I both from SecureAuth. So Dawn Marie, let's start with you, if you don't mind. So can you paint us a picture of what you believe to be wrong with authentication today?
Well, I think there's a couple things, but most fundamentally is the process of authorization is broken, right? So before we even get to a place where we can authenticate a user, we need to know if they're authorized to have access to what they need. And the business isn't terribly good at deciding what people need. And the process and the foundations for which we build our authentication is fundamentally broken. So until we can kind of fix that governance element, we're going to have some challenges on the authentication side. And I would say second is users. So long as a user will cough up their credentials in a somewhat basic social engineering or phishing attempt, we're always going to struggle with keeping credentials secure. And more than that, if the technology, if the things we put in place to protect them become cumbersome and interfere with their ability to do their job, they're going to find a way around it. And that may mean that they work completely off network because their process of authenticating is such a challenge that they end up just working completely off network on their own assets, and that creates a whole different problem.
And so to the customers on the panel, right? So Kevin, Christian, and Steve, given your vertical differences and again, background, do you feel agree, disagree? Do you feel like there's anything else worth noting from an authentication perspective?
Most of what I'm hearing at this conference, and this is my first CIS, it's really great, but we all kind of understand that there's a problem. We all understand that it's not just a technology problem, but it's also a human problem. And for me, what has galvanized that more in my organization is realizing that the users do not understand the significance most of the time of that simple action. It's onerous to them, even if it's just a simple password. And if I do too much with that, I make it worse. So even though I would agree the users are a problem, I think that I'm saying that as a representative of the information security problem, am as big a part of the problem as they are.
So I want to just build up a bit on what Dawn Marie mentioned, which I believe 100% in the first item you talked about, the way in how we actually go about provisioning for accounts and whatnot, it is absolutely broken. And the thing that I hate the most is when somebody says, make like. So somebody walks in, we give them the same access as somebody else, for example. Now we're not able to truly look at the identity of that individual beyond just, for example, their ID, their username and password. And one of the things that we're building on more because of the actual behavior of the users that we have in the environment are trends. And trends as it relates to their job, as it relates to their daily activities, trying to learn how they actually behave over a period of time. How does that correlate to their job duties so we can then match, so we can go beyond just numbers and passwords that a user would have in their daily life. Because the truth is, technology can't fix a human behavior to some extent, right? You could give them all the access in the world, they write it on a piece of paper, put it underneath the keyboard, right? And then now everybody has their password. Or if you go to biometrics, well, there's ways around it. So we're really tracking the behavior of our users more so than the actual content of how they got there.
One of the things we did, post-breach in my organization is we invited people in to talk about how we invested and the programs that we built. And of the 14 that have visited, most of them, as it relates, most people are thinking about whether it's remote access or VPN or application virtualization, but often they miss sort of the portal use case. If you have a internet website that you guys build things probably or sell things or provide services, and anything you have inside or outside that's username and password, that notion of it not being perishable It typically doesn't change, or their client or your customer may change it, but that's a very difficult thing to manage. And when a problem happens in that space, it's costly. It's costly from a threat perspective, and it's costly from a management perspective. If I gave you 1,000 accounts that maybe you do business with, and you say, hey, I believe these accounts have been compromised via some issue, reaching out to each of them and having to contact them and call them and use your customer service people or maybe some of your technical people to manage that is costly, and it hurts. And it irritates a lot of people. So if you had to make those calls, that's a real issue. It was an issue for us, and it's one of the things we want to do to provide to our client base, our member base. And so that's one of the things I think that's broken is that many of us, including really good teams, are often, and I don't mean this I'm not going at anyone when I say this, but operate from a position of ignorance. And so being aware of what is really going on out there and then how to sort of step in front of that, I think is one of the biggest issues operationally that we can work towards fixing.
And so, Keith, if you wouldn't mind sort of rounding that out, I mean, as a company who started as an authentication vendor, maybe people find it ironic that we could stand up here and talk about the risks of authentication when, in fact, we've been producing authentication features within our product set for years. But knowing we've made a philosophical change in the last couple of years to focusing on preventing misuse and not just providing authentication, why don't you share with the audience a little bit about what our mindset was and why we changed and why we think it needs to continue to change?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I think that there are some delusions in our industry as a whole. We talk about breaches and we talk about malware. We talk about how malware is used to orchestrate these breaches, and the reality is we're focused on completely the wrong problem. Investments organizations have in network and endpoint capabilities, whatever they may be, are all very worthwhile, and we all have to have those. But the reality is we've been neglecting for all too long the fact that it's compromised credentials. It's the absolute basics that attackers use once they obtain that foothold. And the truth is we're just doing nothing about it. Even the identity and access management space, as it's measured, as analysts talk about it, is wrong. It's broken. We talk about identity and access governance, and we talk about privileged account management, and the reality is that sure, these investments are good, and it's good from a compliance and a checkbox standpoint, but breaches still continue to rise. Compromised credentials are still being used, and the reality is that even when we talk about second factor, we're racing towards an antiquated technology. How often do you get an email from some consumer portal that you use that you now have to set up two-factor via SMS and to receive an OTP? We know that this gets circumvented continually. We know that social engineering can be used to circumvent the most basic of knowledge-based questions and answers, yet here we are still racing towards these antiquated technologies that provide us these bare methods of protection that are only really just above that of using a username or password. So the reality is we've really got to change our mindset because we're on a losing battle here. And next year, what's it going to be? 90% of breaches are orchestrated through compromised credentials or default credentials. Is it going to be 95%? Is it going to be 100%? So IAM is broken. We're focused on the wrong problems, and we're slightly deluded in how we think about the problem in the industry today.
Thanks. So, Dawn Marie, let me ask you first, and then again round out with customers on the panel. Do you feel like there's a difference in the problem when you're speaking to your customers seeking advice relative to B2E, the internal employee, B2B, the third-party risk, and the B2C? When we're talking about the different users, do you think the problem set's any different with those different user categories?
Well, it comes down to setting the stage of the business problem in each of those cases, because internally, I think a lot of people, you're really not afraid to make your internal customer uncomfortable and put upon them different levels of controls, although I think that weakens us for all the reasons I kind of mentioned before. But when you're talking about your third parties and your business customers, you can't afford to slow down their access to whatever it is they're getting from you. So that they're expecting that their credentials are secure. They're expecting that their information is secure with you, but they don't want to have to interface with any kind of technology that would ensure those things, right? So anything that slows them down, the business side, internally, your business partners are going to go, absolutely not. We're not doing that. And then customers on the other side, when they get that kind of, oh, I have to reset my, I have one particular credit card that for whatever reason, I'm forever having to re-authenticate with the actual card, and I get frustrated and I just don't use it anymore.
Maybe your husband doesn't want you to use that card.
Yeah, it's possible. But my,
Typing in the wrong password over and over.
that's right. But my point is, like, that control, which is there to protect me, is going to cause me to not use that credit card because it's just a pain. And so when we look at authentication as security leaders, those are very real conversations that are happening. And I often find when I come in to help clients that my client side is not sensitive to the business objections. And so those clashes interfere with the security team's obligation to the customers, but also their ability to be successful.
Steve, of those 3 classes, where did you guys start first? And why?
So I mean, there's really, it's equal in all the spaces. I mean, we made investments in a tiered manner simply as resources allowed, but I think that, and I got to say also, I look at things from a slightly different lens. I'm no longer sort of on the web infrastructure or sort of on the IT side, more from a threat perspective. I'll go to say, I'm going to switch to some news. You guys familiar, maybe some of you heard the term Dark Overlord? So,
That's Keith's gaming name, by the way.
yeah, it is actually. So Dark Overlord is a group of people. It's not one person, and they've been buying. Well, let me take a step back. They've hit many in healthcare. They also hit Gorilla Glue. Remember the dump of Orange is the New Black? Also hit. So the thing that doesn't get talked about enough in that we catch on to buzzy things often in our world, and because it's interesting and cute sounding. But the thing that all this ties back to is the theft and reuse of stolen credentials, which never gets mentioned anywhere in any of the news that you read. But all this pain has been, there was 6,000 cancer patients that had their information dumped from a clinic that I won't name. This is serious stuff, and it all ties back. Not everyone talks about this either, but there are sites like Exdetic and others that reside in the Russian Federation that they buy and sell credentials. It happens, and this isn't boogeyman stuff. It's real. It happens like a business, right? This isn't some fake, NSA ion cannon thing. This is real, and they obtained access, most believe, just by buying access, and then they sign into these environments, and then they traverse on the inside of these organizations. So having that context and understanding, having programs, I spent a lot of money on developing programs around this space, but again, having something that works both on the inside and outside is equally important. So we attacked both because we believe both were necessary because of the threats we saw.
Kevin, what did you guys prioritize across those 3, and if so, why?
Well, it's a very different conversation for us. We went at fixing what we could of the internal, the employees, the enterprise, and we're well on our way with that. But we're an insurance company that uses a network of independent agents who are not employees.
So that'd be your third party. That'd be your third party B2B. Yep.
Yeah, that's my B2B. And as they would lose their credentials, and that would be reported back to us from the FSISAC, and we had to go to them and say, we're cutting off your access to our system that you use to sell our product. See, that's a very difficult conversation.
So you're just cutting off revenue on purpose at that point.
Yeah, we're cutting our own throat. So it's and then thinking, once they sell it, that customer is in our care. So that's that's the consumer out on the other end that we have care and feeding for. That's an entirely different conversation. So it would be the same, though, if you're a manufacturer and you have independent distributors. You're in an entirely different realm. So it's different. It's a different conversation. It's different economics, and it's a different way to communicate. We can educate. We do a lot of security education in the enterprise. We do as much as we can with the agents if we can get their attention. But we have a golf course. We call them in, and I do presentations to them while they're sitting there in their golf clothes. So when you get a chance, but to the consumer, that's an entirely different economic and educational opportunity.
So, healthcare is actually quite a bit different than the rest of the panel here, because the clinicians and the physicians that we work with and whatnot don't really care about security that much. They care about providing care to the patients, and that's their number one mission, which is the absolute thing to do. However, as time is progressing, it wasn't until recent years where we started paying attention. When I say we, meaning the collective, healthcare environment, to security, because it used to be where a physician will share his or her credentials with someone to help kind of get the work done. Well, this is what I talked about earlier in trying to understand workflows and trends and behaviors. So to attack the issue of internal versus external, it was a phased approach for us. We had to begin with the internal first to ensure that at least there's a baseline that we can, all reference and we can work off of. And then once they started understanding the security and how it applies and what they're supposed to do with the credentials and how do they deal with it and whatnot, then we started stepping up all the way through now having the external presence as well, being at the same level. We used different tools, including SecureAuth, which helped us, get there. But the truth is, the way in how folks treat their actual credentials is so crucial for us, because when you give out VPN, by the way, we're trying to get away from VPN, right? So because that allows even more gateways into your environment. So as we give out credentials, we're doing a lot more teaching nowadays. We're doing a lot more education, so to help kind of get the user to understand the difference and how they apply it.
So if I heard the three of you properly, the theme started with Domre's initial comments. You started inside and worked your way outside, typically either because of resources or able to control the insider more than you are the outsider, and the economics and business case was different for the outsider, maybe harder. Keith, I would say that we're probably seeing it differently, right? I mean, we're seeing more of our customers coming to us from a consumer protection perspective as much as we are from an enterprise protection perspective. Can you shed some light on why you think that is?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the trends that we see is that a lot of organizations, a lot of folks think that there has to be a trade-off between strong security and good user experience. And the reality is that if we're talking about basic methods of two-factor, there is a trade-off, right? My mom always says, "Why do I have to keep getting this password every time I log in that changes all the time? Why can't it be the same?" And it's like, well, that's your one-time password. She doesn't understand that that's a different password than the password she already knows, and she's got two passwords now. So the reality is that from a consumer perspective, not only are we kind of broken from a strong authentication standpoint, but we're kind of broken from an end user experience standpoint. So a lot of the inquiries and a lot of the opportunities that we get engaged in are where organizations want to try and maintain some balance between providing strong authentication and a good user experience. Basically, the two do not have to be mutually exclusive. And the way that you can go about that quite simply is obtain some level of trust or mitigate some level of risk before the user even logs in. The idea being is that from a consumer workflow perspective, consumers have very high expectations on what that workflow should be. So the idea is really basic. Don't get in the way of the user unless you absolutely need to. Don't put a second factor of authentication in front of the user unless you absolutely need to. Analyze as much risk, mitigate as much risk as you can, discover as much as you can about that identity, that set of credentials that are being used, and only step up, only put that two-factor in place of the user if you absolutely need to. So that's the trend that we see from a business to consumer perspective. In the case of Anthem, that was a major requirement for their consumer portal is quite simply that they wanted to provide that good balance of end user experience with strong security.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. One of the things I keep seeing is organizations trying to meet their compliance or their customers' requirements for security, and so they're changing their password rotation to 60 days, 12-character complex, which means your users are writing that down, they're using a saved method, or you're misspending about $1.5 million a year on help desk calls for password resets. And so all of those things kind of, if you can make the password good and you can make its life longer with strong authentication, that's solving one of those challenges that users just simply won't accept that 60-day complex passphrase. As a security pro, our own password policy makes me crazy, and I get it.
Right, but isn't that all the more reason to just kill the credential altogether?
Oh, I'm down.
Say that to a regulator. You don't have password?
Right, they don't change every 6
So you don't think that resonates in the industry right now? The idea of getting rid of passwords altogether?
Even if it resonates in the industry, you're not going to pull it off.
Yeah, we need to get to the regulators to pull that off.
Yeah, we all know that this is not going to work until the right thing to do is the easy thing to do. But there's no straight path to the easy thing to do. Probably people in this room are still dealing with legacy applications that won't even accept a special character. Or they've already gone through the bad press of, and I was actually with a bunch of CSOs several weeks ago, and the room was actually talking about how they were reducing the time that the password lived, and they were going to 15-character passwords. I was like, you got to be kidding me. You are, and that's why I said
We've hit a hot button, can you tell?
We're the part of the problem. We are making it harder on them. We are making it harder on ourselves by failing to understand that user story. We need to be more about the user stories.
Yeah, so I would just to add a few points to that. So, I mean, all password complexity does is inhibits user experience. There is absolutely no security in password complexity. At the end of the day, all the time attackers are picking up hashes and replaying them and using them or going straight to the identity store. I mean, password length and complexity and policies are useless at that point.
Password complexity makes password reset my second factor, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
How often is forgot my password your authentication
It's your second
process?
factor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Try telling my mum that one. So what I will say is that I agree with you that from a regulatory perspective, we're pretty much screwed to the wall for a while. And I think that, Dawn, to your point, that getting to the regulators is part of it. I think that while organizations like NIST, I think, are actually now a little more forward-thinking and being a little bit more in tune with reality with some of the standards that are coming down the pipe, which we're glad to see. What I will say, though, is that are we trying to take a compliance? And by the way, I also respect and understand that in financial services and in healthcare, there's always going to be, I don't want to say laggard industries, but from a regulatory standpoint, there's always going to be newer approaches that, because they're not met from a regulatory or approved from a regulatory standpoint, that you're not going to be able to go with. But what I will say is that, are we concerned we're trying to actually just check compliance check boxes, or actually concerned we're trying to remediate against the fact that attackers are using stolen credentials and we're still being popped day in, day out? What is the problem here that we're trying to solve? I do think that passwordless approaches hold a lot of hope, where there is no, and by that I mean where there is no password hash to be stolen, to be replayed. However, the reality is that then the attackers, all we're doing is increasing the cost of the attack, and the attackers are then going to go after the passwordless capability, whatever that is. But I think it's a hard journey, but I think that passwordless does offer the opportunity to solve some of the problems of today.
I think it's important for us to never forget the business aspect of all this, right? So in healthcare, if we were to just, take the passwords out, right? So we're giving the users right away a sense of, like, why are they not having passwords? So now they're concerned because they believe there is some level of security by having.
Which users? Enterprise, consumers?
Consumers.
Okay.
Consumers in this case. And to some level, the enterprise folks as well. But then now they're thinking, well, you're reducing the security. Why are you doing that? So I think there needs to be a very well thought out, built, phased process to get there, but you need to get the buy-in of the consumer first. So as we change our model, as we are a lot more out on the web, as we are a lot more, developing and producing and offering services that don't require for you to come in physically to the facility to get treated, for example. Now you're doing a lot of this stuff over the web. If you don't offer a password, what does that mean to the user? How should they behave? What should they think about what you're offering them? All these things. So you need to balance the business aspect of it with the security aspect of it, and that's a delicate balance. It's not easy for us to just, you don't change on Monday and come up with it on Sunday type thing.
But I would say that socially that's changing. I would say pretty much Gen X and down, we're already comfortable with the social logins. So we're already seeing that quick pass-through type authentication mechanisms, and we're willing to let Facebook manage it for us, right? So I think that there's some element of generational change that will allow that password.
Right, we don't care about Keith's mom's password anymore. That's 100% for sure.
But both of them.
But the reality is, you're right, but there's still a very significant percentage of our consumer that are not Facebook, savvy, or they're not actually using their social media password to connect to other portals and environments. So it is important for us. I think we're a few years away, just not today.
But I'd counter a little bit of that by saying that because of that, I think we have to be even more careful with that clientele, because the risk of that endpoint that they're working from having, Pony botnet or some sort of credential harvesting malware is very high at the point that they're less tech savvy. So almost protecting, in a way, them from themselves in a way, acting as that bridge.
And that's why I said it needs to be a phased approach. We shouldn't just swap over like within a couple of days.
Well, and it's all converging in the first place. I mean, I sat in a panel a month ago in Irvine, and the global CIO of cybersecurity and risk at JP Morgan Chase got up and gave a presentation. And the statistics he used were, 38% of the industry is using their digital consumer personal passwords for their corporate identity passwords, because it's easier to, if I already have to remember 30 of them, I want to remember 5 and use them in both worlds, right? And so now your very compromisable personal account, which is very hackable, all I now need to do is guess user IDs because you're replaying the same password in the corporate environments, right? So, I mean, I guess at some point, if we ever want to reduce credentials, we have to just decide that we're going to impact the end user experience, and they're going to get over it, and they're going to understand it, because frankly, we can't continue to live with the risk related to breach.
But here's the thing, though. We're trying to give them a more positive end user experience while trying to solve the problem. It's a win-win. I mean, I agree there's a perception issue, but sooner or later we've got to suck it up, right? It's a net win, across the board all round. Is it not? Yeah.
So we have about 15 minutes left. I've got a very purposeful question for everybody on the panel towards the end, but I thought maybe you guys out there might have a question that we haven't asked the panel yet, or that you're just dying to ask the panel. So anybody out there got something they want to hear?
It's Abby. I'm doing next-gen authentication. I'm from Aetna, so I know the problems you're talking about. I kind of disagree with the assessment that we're stuck with the password on the consumer side. What we're doing from our end, especially on mobile, you go with password once, and then we hide it from you. We use the Touch ID, we use FIDO, we do risk-based on the back end. So you don't need to reset your password coming back to me or memorize it once you have used it within one device. We're doing the same solution on the web. Our customers, the way we see it, those that are savvy with the Touch ID, that's what they want to do. The same experience from social applications, they want our applications to act the same. Okay, same like Facebook, same like Google, same like everyone else. And this is what we're doing, a copy. Okay? On the web, it's a little bit harder because FIDO at least is not ready on the web, but we can work it out where we can do the simulation of the mobile experience on the web. So, I think, don't underestimate the consumer. The consumer don't want to be bugged. Whatever we do with them is much easier than doing a password reset the first time they come back to us after 11 months.
I actually have great point. I actually have a follow-on question for you. Are you getting requests from individual members, or are you getting requests from what we would refer to in industry as national accounts, so big business asking?
Everyone wants to have secure. They know our insurance password problem is broken. Our KBA sucks, it's not good. Because,
KBA sucks.
yes. And, but the customers don't want to be bugged, and the business don't want to keep doing a password reset. They want to focus on the business. Yep. So, like 2 years ago, they were reluctant. We don't want to change the user flow or whatever. Now, everyone is saying, no, we need to do it. We need to. So I see a big change in our attitude from the consumer side and the business side. We've done a lot of trials with the users, if you make it easy for them and consistent with how they interact, it's smooth. If you have to have your own process and deviate, it's harder.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Hi, I kind of have a question for Stephen. You mentioned before about theft, identity theft, and how this is hurting business, and you had some experience about in that area as far as providing security around that space. I'll just give you a quick use case. We also, well, one thing, I think you don't hear about this a lot. You talked about why we don't hear about it, because companies consider it embarrassing, right? They don't want to talk about it. Companies, we get hacked a lot, and a lot of it, we have a corporate space and an education space. Education, identities are stolen a lot, or people leave the university doesn't come back to us and tell us those people are gone. And so those passwords get sold, they disappear, they get given to friends, and then we get like people trying to get at our data because they get in our system from, it's usually 3 countries, which I won't name, 3 or 4 countries, but they're trying to get at our data. So what we do is, our standard is try to figure out where they're coming from if we can. Then we try to contact them through legal, with a nasty letter from our lawyers saying, do you want to be a customer, you want to pay for the data, or else, or we try to cut them off so we can figure out where they're coming from.
Have you met SecureAuth?
Huh?
Have you met SecureAuth? Let me make an introduction.
Yeah. But but anyway, one solution that we come up with is we're moving toward federation. So we're having not identifier first federation, but unlike Google, it will be like a trusted relationship. But of course, it takes time to roll out with each IT department, each customer. Some customers don't want to federate. Some customers don't have the technology to federate. So I was wondering what other ideas or what things have you seen in this regard?
Oh, big question, big space, and appreciate, thanks. So we, look, there's a couple of ways that we wanted to hit this. One of them is I want to make sure I preserve my staff, and that's a selfish thing, but I want to make sure that they don't have to hit these things each time, and from an incident response perspective, that we don't have to, at the point we're looking for these bad things, we didn't want to have to go through, and you mentioned the pain of lawyers, and contacting people, and all that is slow and inefficient and unrewarding. You're not going to get promoted for having to you need to fix and come up with a better way. Like the earlier gentleman mentioned, to say, okay, what is the better way? Or the ways we're talking about here, to say, what's a smarter way to say, with making intelligence-based decisions. So, the way we approached it from my organization is, let's take the problem off the table. Like, I don't want to see, I still want to be aware of if we see dumps, or if we buy certain credential dumps or things, and I've got people to do that. But take it off the table to say, hey, if I see it from a place I don't trust, if I see it from a location that is bad, if I'm doing some sort of geo-velocity or impossible distance calculation to say, hey, I saw you sign in from Ohio, and now I'm seeing you sign in from someplace else that we don't like, it's an impossible, travel time, take it off the table, and then use that information as intelligence to say, now I know how many situations, if I'm sharing an account with my friend in Seattle, and I went to your university or your educational services, I'm seeing this, whoa, wait a minute. Is this person still a student? I just saw a step up. Maybe that kicks off a workflow to legal, to client services, whatever. I spent an incredible amount of money building all of this manually, and using GeoIP information, MaxMind, threat intel feeds, all this stuff. And then I'm like, look, I'm still having to respond and feel the pain. I wrote a business case and sent it to the web portal team, and they're like, hey, they went to market. I didn't buy SecureAuth. My web portal team did. So that allows me then to not have to fuss with this noise anymore. So, I mean, that's really what we did. There's other things we're doing in the space, but it kind of gets beyond really the scope of this chat. But I'm happy to chat afterwards to say some of the other things we've done.
So Kevin, why don't you try? I'm sorry, Marie, go ahead.
Yeah, so I had the same use case. So I was the CISO for a global retailer, 550 stores, and the challenge is retail has high turnover, and so we weren't able to keep up with the turnover and the termination of accounts, and struggling with, do we give them LAN IDs? Do we give them local IDs? And then subsequently, how do we manage the risk around those IDs? And so that was how I came to purchase SecureAuth ultimately, was being able to identify when an ID wasn't used by the person it was assigned to. So it was a secondary catch to us not being able to terminate IDs fast enough.
And if I can just add as well, just on top of Steve and Dawn Marie's points, so when we think about some of the problems when we're trying to solve them around authentication, we always go to the fact that we're trying to solve the problem from a protection standpoint, right? We spoke about balancing good end user experience with strong authentication, but the part of the reward that an adaptive authentication model holds is not just around protecting and ensuring that we are keeping the bad guys out and only letting the good guy in, but it also gives us a wonderful detection capability as well. To their points, you're cutting through all that day-to-day noise, right? So think of the information you're getting off of the authentication process as an infiltration indicator of compromise. It's not, and I'm not saying that no solution, including SecureAuths, are not prone to false positives. Everything is. But at the same time, everything that you're getting off of existing security investments at the edge, at network, and the endpoint, these are IOCs, these are indicators of compromise built upon sandboxing technologies, built upon malware analysis. If you have a bad actor that is a human, a living, breathing person, at least we like to think most of them are, and they're using these compromised credentials, then that's a true infiltration indicator that someone is doing something bad. You need to know about that. You need to help use that to cut through all of that other event, all of that other alerting noise. So try and think about identity and access management, specifically strong authentication, not just in the realms of providing layers of protection, but also enhancing your detection capability, enhancing your hunting programs, enhancing your incident response programs. Think of it as just getting more bang for your buck.
One real quick thing. So even if you don't have a hunt program and all this other sort of high-angle InfoSec teams and people, one of the things that's really costly, both in human capital, development, content creation, all of that, is normalizing an event, an identity, a log file, or maybe 10 different log sources from the authentication attempt, an IPS piece of information, all this threat intel, all of that, and making something that's inhuman into something that's identity-based. And so we spent a lot of time initially building that in-house and ultimately made a transition to adaptive auth, and that saves me development cycles and cost on the back end from a threat and a threat response perspective. So I get benefit from that, not to mention all the other sort of process and customer experience benefits. But I wanted to say that it's an identity, it's actually a human-based event, and it's normalized for you if you align with the right group. So that's keenly important for purposes of everything from customer support, incident response, and everything in between.
Any other questions out there? Okay, so, sorry. Thank you.
Hey, Robert, Steve Tout here. I would ask this question to everybody on the panel about signal-to-noise ratio, regardless of what vendor tools that you use. Are there rough ballpark percentages that you see in terms of what percentage of real threat actors that you see on your network versus valid users and noise?
Yes, I can start with that one. So actually, I have a question. Do you mean on SecureAuth's network specifically, or typically what we may see across our customer base?
Both.
Yeah, sure. I can throw some. I'm not smart enough to throw out percentage calculations right now, but I can tell you that one large hedge fund manager out of New York has some pretty decent investments across VPN network and endpoint technologies, and they have a signal to noise ratio of around 30 million events per day. And they use the events that they are getting from SecureAuth to cut through those 30 million events, and they distill that down to about 12 to 15 a day. And they use the fact that credentials are being used in bad ways across network and endpoint, combined with, and that's not SecureAuth alone, right? That's combined with those other events that they're getting. But yeah, they distill it down from about 30 million to 12 to 15. So that's one off the top of my head that's real.
Anybody else?
I mean, I'm not in a position to quote statistics in that, but I can tell you it's higher than you might expect, especially in a condition where you're using a non-perishable authentication mechanism exposed to the internet. You're going to see a lot of activity, and most of it's not going to be good.
And I would just say, you know, visibility is always going to be the first problem you need to tackle. You know, first is, you know, we think that we need more information, and then we drowned ourselves in the information. I think there's technologies now, and we've been talking about them, no sense me repeating them, that enable you to make better, smarter decisions. Automation is key. I mean, now that there are technologies that will allow you to automate a lot of this. If you're still reading logs, you're woefully behind, you know. Automate it, and it is, let us just say, I think the panel would say, it is possible to reduce that down to something that you can hand to analysts who will have a chance to think about it. If your strategy is fast detect, fast react, and then we'll protect what we can.
Yeah, I would say it's so pervasive that you almost just don't have the people. Like, if you're willing to, if you can break it down to just enough that it's palatable for one person, do you really want to put in a time when we're 3-to-1 understaffed? Do you really want somebody watching that? So I would say that it wouldn't be something I would watch. But kind of to answer your question a little bit is, you know, we came up with this name called Advanced Persistent Threat, right? But that really, all that means is it's a stolen credential used against you, and then they just push through and wiggle east-west. But it's arguably called the absurdly probable threat because the credentials are coughed up so frequently that it's taken on a whole new term. But we kind of create this dust storm by saying it's an advanced persistent threat. These aren't hackers. These are, you know, these are easy tricks.
Yeah, I would probably second what everybody on the panel already mentioned, but there's no way for us to, you know, on a daily basis, it could change drastically. The noise versus, you know, real threat levels. And if I was to give it a percentage point, I will say somewhere between 40 and 60% in regards to, you know, what's real versus what's fake, or what's trying to break into your environment. But to everybody's point, the ratio of being able to get it down to a point where someone can sit and actually do some analysis on it, it's a big undertaking still even today. There are some tools that will shrink it, but it's not going to go away just yet.
One thing I will share. So many of you have received phishing emails, and some of them take you to a form website that pretends to be something that it's not. You know, visit this website to get your new version of Windows installed, or whatever it is, you know, or whatever that might be. And there's some form fields, often going back to a Google form site or something. So we've created what we call Chase accounts, not the bank, but it's a Chase account is what we refer to it. Anyway, so and we enter those in on purpose, and we see them used within seconds. And there's cases where we've seen it where we believe it's a human, and there's other cases where we know that it's automated. So you tell me, and in many cases it comes back in through AWS. So these conditions, like, you have to apply an immense amount of resources just to get to the point where you go from ignorant to aware. And it's a lot of work. It's fun, but it's a lot of damn work. And then how to operationalize that to cover all your bases. You know, I'm talking about one event that I know to be true in this, and then how do I take that and roll that out? My job, if I'm not influencing the change in my organization, like, I can play whack-a-mole all day, but the difference of an organization like mine is one that helps shape and change the future investment. And no matter what organization you're in, like, how do you understand the problems we have today and take and change the way the next dollar is spent? And hopefully it's on something that works versus something that doesn't. We're really good, especially in the security front, of buying tools that don't work. Like, I've got a whole presentation on this. Stop buying stuff that doesn't work and being okay with it. So investing in something that takes at least one problem off the table. But I know within seconds we see it, we've tested it, we've validated it, and we know where they come from.
So
I would also say the only other thing I could say about Signaltonoise is about the only time I really get my dander up is when there's no noise. When it's suspiciously quiet, that's when I'll deploy every single person on my team to find out why is it too quiet.
So if we heard, right, just to kind of bring the panel to a close, if we heard that credentials are obviously a huge problem, if we know that no one likes passwords, but people are scared to get rid of passwords, especially Keith's mom, if we heard that we're understaffed 3 to 1, if we can't ascertain signal noise, it all sounds unsolvable. Yet here we are, right, talking about ways to solve it. It's just starting with Christian and working down the panel. What do you believe as an industry, succinctly, we need to do to truly see a change in what Keith talked about when we first started? Every year, the Verizon breach report labels the next double-digit number higher in breaches related to compromised credentials. What do you collectively think we need to do as an industry to stop that from happening, or at least turn the number backward?
So I don't know that any one of us is going to answer the question the way that applies to, across the board just yet. But from my perspective, I really want to beat down into the idea of workflow, behavior. That's really important for us to start collecting a lot of analytics in regards to that behavior and how, the users, whether internal or external, are going to be able to use it. The one thing we all have to remember, whether we deliver a service or we are a consumer of that service, the reality is it's a set amount of things we allow the other end to do. So whether they're coming in or you're actually presenting what you need, we need to really look at behavior. And then passwords and whatnot, they'll change. They'll eventually go away in the environment, and they should. I do agree that we need to simplify things a lot more than they are today. But I think we need to be cognizant at all times of the fact that if you don't work on changing the human behavior, you're not going to be able to make this issue go away in a sense that's more adaptable across industries.
Thank you. Kevin?
So I don't know what I could comment on what a 170-year-old PNC insurer from the Midwest could do to affect the industry.
Keep the golf course clean. We'll be good.
Yeah, but for the company that I work for, I think and I think for many companies, that it have a plan and understand the problems with that plan, execute on it, determine what is the longest period of time that you're willing to tolerate no change in your situation, and try and shorten that. And understand that you're on a journey. You need to have a roadmap. Execute on it. Understand it's not perfect, but technologies are getting better. But it's always going to be an arm race. It's never going to be over. And be on the firing line, putting lead down range every day, and understand that everybody is in the same situation. We're dealing with the exact same thing, and I don't think it's a completely solvable problem, or we'd have world peace by now, right? We are not the industry that is. Are we preaching that we are monumental failures? I don't think that we are.
Keith would say yes.
Keith is.
I
think the rest of us are. But
I concur.
Hold on. Personally, or as an industry?
That right now we have monumental problems that need good answers, and it's events like this and companies like SecureAuth and the sponsors of this thing that are doing the industry changing thing.
Dawn Marie?
So, I agree 100%. The one thing that really resonates with me is that, we got to stop declaring ourselves as an industry kind of failure. So you mentioned Verizon data breach report, right? So every year we say, oh gosh, there were more breaches this year than last year, right? You guys are all failures. But the problem really is that our ability to detect, our ability to chase that stuff down, we have stuff to report now. So it may not be that we are seeing increases in breaches. It's that we're seeing increases in indicators of compromise because we have the tools in place, because we're doing the right things. I think we're going the right direction. But I think tying information access management to the actual data is where we're broken right now. I think that the data is just everywhere in the environment, so we haven't gotten our hands around data governance. And without that, we can't manage what those credentials give you access to. And so connecting the dots on those things, I think, is an important step.
So my longest talkers on the panel have 3 minutes. Just be cognizant of people's time.
Sure. So this topic. So I'm gonna be that person, I think we all are failing, especially in InfoSec space, failing horribly. I would argue that many of us are frauds. So we keep buying things that don't work. Look at antivirus detection rates. And yet all of our vendors, if you go and read, will say, oh, it's 99% detects all, right? Read an IPS or an antivirus. It's all rubbish. So we subscribe to a message that is wrong. We're not good mentors or leaders. We've got a gap in talent. We're very bad at identifying what a threat actor may do when we operate in a vacuum of experience. We subscribe to organizations often that don't do representative testing. And so we are then confused by shiny objects and put our dollar there versus approaching problems that we have today. So focusing on problems we have today versus ones we don't. So again, back to stolen credentials. It's most of our breaches tie back to endpoint malware or stolen credentials, period. So how well are we doing on endpoint malware? Whether it's WannaCry or whatever else, right? We're doing horribly. And so until we start focusing on things with that lens, as uncomfortable as that is, and as guilty as starting with me in this field, I think until we start to recognize that, we're never going to change. We can't continue doing the same things and expect a different result. You've heard that before. So there's a whole litany of things I think that we need to look at and understand really what's the core. Just like the issue of the dark overlord I mentioned before, of the news and it gets buzzy, or WannaCry, it gets buzzy. It's a result of buying credentials, or in the other case, simply missing a patch. But we don't focus on that story as much. So that's my take.
Steve kind of stole some of my rhetoric there. But so look, I would just say that if you're responsible for IAM and IAM is one of your funded priorities, then you need to use the IAM strategy to focus on the fact that credentials are being used by attackers to walk through the front door. And not saying that other IAM capabilities are not important, such as identity and access governance and privilege account use and so on and so forth. But consider the fact that you're still letting attackers walk through the front door if you don't consider IAM as a way of solving the problem of today, which is the breach. Thanks for attending, and hope you found it mildly valuable, and sorry that it got so damn depressing at the end.
Yep. Next time you start at that end.